Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 10 of our complete practice question series for the AZ-400 Microsoft Certified DevOps Engineer Expert exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 10. Question number 404. Scenario. A product owner is creating an Azure DevOps dashboard. The dashboard must show how long work items typically take to move from the active state to the completed state. Which widget should the product owner add? The available options are as follows. Option A, burnup. Option B, cycle time. Option C, cumulative flow diagram. Option D, burn down. The correct answer is option B, cycle time. Here's why. Cycle time measures the elapsed time from when work actively begins until the work is completed. Why are the other options not correct? A. Burnup shows completed work compared with total scope. C. A cumulative flow diagram shows work item counts across workflow states and helps identify bottlenecks. D. Burn down shows the amount of remaining work over time. Exam tip. Lead time begins when work is requested. Cycle time begins when active work starts. Question number 405. Scenario. A business-critical API must be released with minimal service interruption. The operations team can maintain 2 complete production environments and requires the ability to restore the previous version by switching traffic back immediately. Which deployment strategy should be used? The available options are as follows. Option A, canary deployment. Option B, rolling deployment. Option C, blue-green deployment. Option D, big bang deployment. The correct answer is option C, blue-green deployment. Here's why. Blue-green deployment maintains 2 complete environments. Traffic can be switched to the new environment with little interruption and returned quickly to the previous environment if rollback is required. Why are the other options not correct? A. Canary deployment gradually exposes a new version to a subset of users rather than switching between 2 complete environments. B. Rolling deployment replaces instances incrementally, so rollback can require another rolling operation. D. Big bang deployment replaces the entire release at once and normally provides the greatest deployment and rollback risk. Exam tip. Choose blue-green for rapid cutover and rapid rollback. Choose canary for gradual exposure. Question number 406. Scenario. A GitHub organization uses team-based automatic review requests. Review assignments must favor members with the fewest outstanding requests and balance the number of reviews assigned to each member during the previous 30 days. The engineering manager must never be selected automatically. Which 2 code review assignment settings should you configure? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A. Select never assign certain team members and add the engineering manager. Option B. Set the routing algorithm to round robin. Option C. Clear never assign certain team members. Option D. Set the routing algorithm to load balance. Option E. Select if assigning team members. Do not notify the entire team. The correct answers are option A. Select never assign certain team members and add the engineering manager, and option D. Set the routing algorithm to load balance. Here's why. The load balance algorithm considers outstanding review requests and recent assignments to distribute reviews more evenly. The exclusion setting prevents the engineering manager from being selected automatically. Why are the other options not correct? B. Round robin rotates assignments, but does not prioritize members based on outstanding review load. C. Clearing the exclusion would allow the engineering manager to be assigned. E. The notification option changes who is notified. It does not control reviewer balancing or exclusion. Exam tip. GitHub load balancing accounts for reviewer workload, while the exclusion list handles members who must never receive automatic assignments. Question number 407. Scenario. A Java application is stored in Azure repos. Its build must retrieve dependencies from a repository available only on the corporate network, and the completed binaries must be retained as Azure DevOps server artifacts. A proposed pipeline uses an on-premises self-hosted agent and includes the Java tool installer task, but it does not include an artifact publishing task. For each statement, Select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. The proposed pipeline satisfies all the stated build and artifact storage requirements. Statement 1. The proposed pipeline satisfies all the stated build and artifact storage requirements. The answer is no. The proposal omits the task required to publish and retain the build output as an Azure DevOps artifact. Exam tip. Agent connectivity solves resource access. Artifact publication is a separate pipeline responsibility. Question number 408. Scenario. An Azure Pipeline's job must compile an ASP.NET application and build a Windows container image that uses an IIS-based Windows container as its base image. The team wants Microsoft to maintain the build agent. Which agent should the pipeline use? The available options are as follows. Option A. A Microsoft-hosted Ubuntu agent. Option B. A Microsoft-hosted Windows agent. Option C. A Microsoft-hosted macOS agent. Option D. An agentless server job. The correct answer is option B. A Microsoft-hosted Windows agent. Here's why. A Windows container image with an IIS-based Windows base image requires a compatible Windows Docker host. A Microsoft-hosted Windows agent provides a managed Windows build environment. Why are the other options not correct? A. A Linux Docker host cannot build and run a Windows container image in the required Windows container mode. C. Microsoft-hosted macOS agents do not provide the required Windows container host. D. Agentless jobs run orchestration tasks on the Azure DevOps service and cannot compile the application or execute a Docker build. Exam tip. Match the build agent operating system to the container operating system, especially when building Windows containers. Question number 409. Scenario. A rapidly growing organization uses Microsoft Intragroups and Azure DevOps AP is to automate user onboarding. The organization wants to automate every repeatable user access and entitlement task, which activity remains a commercial billing activity rather than an Azure DevOps user management automation task. The available options are as follows. Option A. Assigning access levels through group rules. Option B. Assigning user entitlements through an API. Option C. Synchronizing security group membership. Option D. Purchasing additional paid licenses. The correct answer is option D, purchasing additional paid licenses. Here's why. License procurement is a billing and commercial purchasing activity. It is not the same as automating user entitlements, access levels, or group membership inside Azure DevOps. Why are the other options not correct? A. Group rules can assign access levels automatically based on Microsoft intra-group membership. B. Azure DevOps AP can automate user entitlement assignments. C. Group membership can be administered through identity management automation. Exam tip. Automated license assignment is different from purchasing the licenses that make those assignments available. Question number 410. Scenario. A team publishes Markdown files from an Azure repos repository as an Azure DevOps code wiki. The team needs to control the order in which pages appear in the wiki navigation tree through source control. What should the team add to the repository? The available options are as follows. Option A. A .order file in each folder whose page order must be defined. Option B. Numeric prefixes added only to the displayed wiki page titles. Option C. A wiki.md file at the repository root. Option D. A pipeline task that drags pages into the required order. The correct answer is option A. A .order file in each folder whose page order must be defined. Here's why. A published code wiki reads page order metadata from .order files committed to the repository. This keeps navigation ordering versioned with the markdown content. Why are the other options not correct? B. Numeric title prefixes are not the supported metadata mechanism for controlling a code wiki's navigation order. C. A wiki.md file does not define the complete navigation hierarchy. D. Drag and drop ordering is not persisted as the source-controlled ordering mechanism for a published code wiki. Exam tip. Use .order files to control hierarchy and ordering when markdown content is published as a code wiki. Question number 411. Scenario. A company has a GitHub organization named Fabricam Engineering. Administrators are configuring Microsoft Intra ID as the SAML identity provider for the organization. Match each SAML setting to the URI that should be configured. The left side items are as follows. Left item 1. Identifier, entity ID, reply URL, assertion consumer service URL, sign-on URL. The right side choices are as follows. Right option A, https://github.com/orgs/fabricam-engineering/SSO. Right option B, https://github.com/orgs/fabricam-engineering. Right option C, https://github.com/orgs/fabricam-engineering/SAML/consume. The correct matches are as follows. Left item 1. Identifier, entity ID. The correct match is https://github.com/orgs/fabricam-engineering. Left item 2. Reply URL, assertion consumer service URL. The correct match is https://github.com/orgs/fabricam-engineering/SAML/consume. Left item 3. Sign-on URL. The correct match is https://github.com/orgs/fabricam-engineering/SSO. Here's why. GitHub uses organization-specific SAML endpoints. The base organization URL identifies the service provider, SAML/consume receives the SAML assertion, and SSO initiates organization sign-in. Exam tip. For GitHub organization SAML, distinguish the organization identifier from the assertion consumer and sign-on endpoints. Question number 412. Scenario. A company is replacing Jira with Azure DevOps. Teams must continue to manage epics, user stories, tasks, bugs, backlogs, and sprint boards. Which Azure DevOps service should the company adopt? The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure Repos. Option B, Azure Boards. Option C, Azure Pipelines. Option D, Azure Artifacts. The correct answer is option B, Azure Boards. Here's why. Azure Boards provides work items, backlogs, sprint planning, Kanban boards, queries, and bug tracking, making it the Azure DevOps service aligned with Jira's work management role. Why are the other options not correct? A. Azure Repos hosts source code repositories. C. Azure Pipelines automates builds, tests, and deployments. D. Azure Artifacts hosts package feeds. Exam tip. Boards tracks work, Repos stores code, Pipelines automates delivery, and Artifacts manages packages. Question number 413. Scenario. An Azure DevOps organization authenticates users through Microsoft Intra ID. Administrators must block access unless a user connects from a trusted public IP range assigned to the corporate network. Which control should the administrators configure? The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure Role-Based Access Control Assignments. Option B, a Microsoft Intra-Conditional Access Policy that uses a named location. Option C, Project-Level Azure DevOps Permissions. Option D, a group policy object applied to developer workstations. The correct answer is option B, a Microsoft Intra-Conditional Access Policy that uses a named location. Here's why. Conditional access can evaluate the user's source location and permit access to Azure DevOps only when the connection originates from trusted corporate public IP ranges. Why are the other options not correct? A. Azure RBAC controls authorization to Azure resources after authentication and does not restrict Azure DevOps sign-in by network location. C. Azure DevOps project permissions control actions within projects, not the network from which users authenticate. D. A GPO configures domain-joined Windows devices, but does not enforce cloud service access based on the originating network. Exam tip. Use conditional access for identity-aware sign-in restrictions such as location, device compliance, risk, and MFA. Question number 414. Scenario. You need to meet the technical requirements for controlling user access and authentication security to Azure DevOps based on corporate network constraints and identity compliance policies. What should you use? The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure Multi-Factor Authentication, MFA. Option B, On-Premises Firewall Rules. Option C, Conditional Access Policies in Azure AD. Option D, Azure Role-Based Access Control, Azure RBAC. The correct answer is option C, Conditional Access Policies in Azure AD. Here's why. Microsoft Intro ID, formerly Azure AD, conditional access policies enable organizations to enforce fine-grained access controls, such as requiring MFA, compliant devices, or trusted corporate IP network locations, before allowing users to access Azure DevOps. Why are the other options not correct? A. Azure MFA is a mechanism for verifying user identity, but conditional access is the policy engine that dictates when and where MFA or access restrictions are enforced. B. On-premises firewalls control network traffic at the local perimeter, not cloud-native SaaS access to Azure DevOps. D. Azure RBAC controls management plane permissions on Azure resources, whereas organization-level conditional access governs Azure DevOps sign-in security. Exam tip. Use Microsoft Intra ID conditional access policies when you need to enforce location-based access, device compliance, or mandatory MFA for Azure DevOps users. Question number 415. Scenario. A DevOps operations team must receive SMS notifications whenever Microsoft schedules maintenance that can affect resources in an Azure subscription. Which two configurations are required? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A. Configure an action group that contains an SMS notification receiver. Option B. Create an Azure Service Health Alert for planned maintenance. Option C. Enable Microsoft Defender for Cloud on every subscription. Option D. Create a CPU metric alert for each Azure resource. The correct answers are Option A. Configure an action group that contains an SMS notification receiver, and Option B. Create an Azure Service Health Alert for planned maintenance. Here's why. Service Health provides subscription-specific planned maintenance notifications. The alert invokes an action group, and the action group delivers the SMS message. Why are the other options not correct? C. Microsoft Defender for Cloud provides security posture and threat protection capabilities, not planned maintenance notification delivery. D. A CPU metric alert monitors resource performance and does not represent Microsoft planned maintenance. Exam tip. An alert rule defines the condition. An action group defines who or what is notified. Question number 416. Scenario. Azure Monitor generates an alert when a production web application exceeds an error threshold. The complete alert payload must be sent to a third-party incident management endpoint with minimal custom infrastructure. Select and arrange the 3 actions required to implement the integration. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1. Select a recurrence trigger. Source item 2. Update the Azure Monitor action group to invoke the workflow. Source item 3. Create an Azure Event Hub. Source item 4. Create an Azure Logic Apps workflow. Source item 5. Select the when an HTTP request is received trigger. Source item 6. Select a sliding window trigger. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A. First action. Destination B. Second action. Destination C. Third action. The first correct mapping is create an Azure Logic Apps workflow, map to first action. The second correct mapping is select the when an HTTP request is received trigger, map to second action. The third correct mapping is update the Azure Monitor action group to invoke the workflow, map to third action. Here's why. Azure Monitor can invoke a Logic Apps workflow through an action group and pass the alert payload to it. The workflow can then transform or forward the data to the third-party endpoint without maintaining custom infrastructure. Exam tip. For alert-driven processing, use an event-capable trigger rather than a schedule-based recurrence trigger. Question number 417. Scenario. Administrators use Microsoft Intra accounts to access Azure DevOps and other Azure management applications. Multi-factor authentication must be required whenever an administrator connects from outside the organization's trusted network locations. What should the identity team configure? The available options are as follows. Option A, an access review. Option B, a Microsoft Intra conditional access policy. Option C, a managed identity. Option D, an entitlement management access package. The correct answer is option B, a Microsoft Intra conditional access policy. Here's why. Conditional access can identify whether a sign-in originates outside trusted named locations and require multi-factor authentication before access is granted. Why are the other options not correct? A. Access reviews periodically validate whether users should retain access. They do not impose MFA during sign-in. C. Managed identities authenticate Azure workloads rather than interactive administrators. D. Entitlement management access packages govern access requests and lifecycle, not contextual MFA enforcement. Exam tip. Use conditional access to enforce MFA based on location, user risk, application, device state, or other sign-in conditions. Question number 418. Scenario. A regulated organization must host its Git repositories inside its own data center. The selected platform must provide centrally managed Git repositories and integrate with Azure pipelines. Which source control platform should the organization deploy? The available options are as follows. Option A, GitHub Enterprise Server. Option B, GitHub Team. Option C, Bitbucket Cloud. Option D, Git in the cloud-hosted Azure Repos service. The correct answer is option A, GitHub Enterprise Server. Here's why. GitHub Enterprise Server is the self-hosted GitHub offering designed to run within an organization-controlled environment while supporting Git repositories and integrations with external CI/CD systems. Why are the other options not correct? B. GitHub Team is a cloud-hosted GitHub plan rather than an on-premises server product. C. Bitbucket Cloud stores repositories in Atlassian's hosted service. D. The cloud-hosted Azure Repos service does not place the repository server inside the organization's data center. Exam tip. Distinguish GitHub Enterprise Server, which is self-hosted, from GitHub Enterprise Cloud and other hosted repository services. Question number 419. Scenario. A YAML pipeline must deploy the same application to a collection of Azure virtual machines. The machines must be registered as governed deployment targets, and deployment history must be associated with the target environment. Which Azure DevOps resource should you create? The available options are as follows. Option A, a variable group. Option B, an Azure DevOps environment containing virtual machine resources. Option C, an agent pool used only for compilation. Option D, an Azure DevOps security group. The correct answer is option B, an Azure DevOps environment containing virtual machine resources. Here's why. Azure DevOps environments can register virtual machines as deployment resources, record deployment history, and support environment-level governance and checks for YAML pipelines. Why are the other options not correct? A. A variable group stores shared pipeline values and secrets, but does not represent deployment targets. C. An agent pool supplies compute that executes pipeline jobs. It does not provide the governed deployment resource model described. D. A security group grants permissions to users and identities rather than grouping deployment machines. Exam tip. Use environments for governed YAML deployment targets. Use agent pools for the compute that executes jobs. Question number 420. Scenario. A company must examine third-party packages during its CI process and fail builds when an open-source component violates the organization's approved license policy. Which tool is designed to provide this software composition and license compliance capability? The available options are as follows. Option A, Maven. Option B, Black Duck. Option C, Bamboo. Option D, CMake. The correct answer is option B, Black Duck. Here's why. Black Duck performs software composition analysis and can inventory open-source dependencies, identify associated licenses, and enforce organizational license policies. Why are the other options not correct? A. Maven builds and manages Java dependencies, but is not itself a comprehensive license compliance scanner. C. Bamboo is a CI/CD server. D. CMake generates build systems and does not perform software composition or license policy analysis. Exam tip. Choose an SCA tool when the requirement concerns third-party dependency inventory, vulnerabilities, or open-source licenses. Question number 421. Scenario. A platform engineer is authoring Kubernetes storage definitions for an Azure Kubernetes service cluster. The workloads require Azure files over SMB, managed Azure disks, and certificates retrieved from Azure Key Vault. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate CSI driver. Statement 1. For a volume backed by an SMB-based Azure file share, configure the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are blob.csi.azure.com, file.csi.azure.com, disk.csi.azure.com, or secrets-stored.csi.kubernetes.io. Statement 2. For a volume backed by an Azure managed disk, configure the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are secrets-store.csi.kubernetes.io, disk.csi.azure.com, file.csi.azure.com, or blob.csi.azure.com. Statement 3. To mount X.509 certificates retrieved from Azure Key Vault, configure the blank. The choices for Statement 3 are disk.csi.azure.com, blob.csi.azure.com, secrets-store.csi.kubernetes.io, or file.csi.azure.com. For Statement 1, the correct selection is file.csi.azure.com. This is the CSI driver for Azure Files volumes. For Statement 2, the correct selection is disk.csi.azure.com. This is the CSI driver for Azure Managed Disk Volumes. For Statement 3, the correct selection is secrets-store.csi.kubernetes.io. The secrets store CSI driver and Azure Provider mount Key Vault objects into a pod. Exam tip. Match the CSI driver to the backing service, file for Azure Files, disk for Azure Disk, and secret store for externally managed secrets and certificates. Question number 422. Scenario. A company operates a legacy Team Foundation server collection containing Team Foundation version control change sets, work item revision history, build definitions, and other project artifacts. The company must migrate the collection to Azure DevOps services while preserving original timestamps and minimizing manual reconstruction. The servers will first be upgraded through the required supported versions. Which migration method should the company use after completing the prerequisite upgrades? The available options are as follows. Option A. Recreate the projects by using REST scripts and import only the latest work item values. Option B. Validate and import the collection by using the Azure DevOps Data Migration tool. Option C. Convert only the TFVC repositories by using a GitTFS utility. Option D. Export the work items to CSV and manually recreate the remaining artifacts. The correct answer is Option B. Validate and import the collection by using the Azure DevOps Data Migration tool. Here's why. The database import migration path preserves rich Azure DevOps server data, including work item revision history and TFVC change set metadata, while avoiding manual recreation of individual artifacts. The collection must first meet the tool's supported version and validation requirements. Why are the other options not correct? A. Recreating projects through REST scripts would require extensive custom work and would not reliably preserve all original revision metadata. C. GitTFS focuses on repository conversion and does not migrate the complete project collection. D. CSV export does not preserve the full artifact set, relationships, or detailed revision history. Exam tip. Use the supported database import migration path when preserving complete Azure DevOps server collection history is mandatory. Question number 423. Scenario. A newly instrumented web application is sending metrics and request telemetry to application insights. Smart detection has been enabled, but no anomaly notification is generated during the first few hours of operation. What most likely explains the missing notification? The available options are as follows. Option A. Smart detection is unavailable unless the application runs on a dedicated app service plan. Option B. The application must be restarted after smart detection is enabled. Option C. Snapshot debugger must be enabled before anomaly detection can operate. Option D. Smart detection needs an initial learning period to establish normal behavior. The correct answer is option D. Smart detection needs an initial learning period to establish normal behavior. Here's why. Smart detection requires sufficient telemetry and an initial learning period before it can identify abnormal behavior relative to the application's baseline. Why are the other options not correct? A. The app service plan tier is not the stated cause of the initial absence of smart detection notifications. B. Restarting the application is not required merely to activate smart detection. C. Snapshot debugger is a separate diagnostic capability and is not a prerequisite for smart detection. Exam tip. Anomaly detection features generally need baseline telemetry before they can distinguish normal and abnormal behavior. Question number 424. Scenario. A PowerShell desired state configuration definition must ensure that the IIS web server role is installed and that a standard index.html file is copied from a network location to the IIS document root. Complete the DSC design by selecting the resource type for each operation. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Use the blank resource to ensure that the web server role is installed. The choices for Statement 1 are Service, Windows Feature, Windows Optional Feature, or Windows Process. Statement 2. Use the blank resource to copy index.html to the IIS document root. The choices for Statement 2 are Archive, Package, File, or Script. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Windows Feature. IIS is installed as the web server Windows Server role by using the Windows Feature DSC resource. For Statement 2, the correct selection is File. The file resource copies and maintains the required file at the destination path. Exam tip. Use Windows Feature for server roles and File for file system content. Do not use Script when a purpose-built idempotent DSC resource exists. Question number 425. Scenario. An Azure Data Factory Link service connects to Azure SQL database by using SQL authentication. The SQL login password must be retrieved from Azure Key Vault by the Data Factory's managed identity. The design must follow least privilege principles and use the recommended authorization model. Complete the security configuration. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Store the SQL login password in Azure Key Vault as of the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Key, Certificate, or Secret. Statement 2. Authorize the Data Factory managed identity by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Service Endpoint Policy, Azure RBAC, or Shared Access Signature. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Secret. Passwords and connection credentials are stored as Key Vault secrets rather than keys or certificates. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Azure RBAC. Azure RBAC is the recommended Key Vault authorization model and supports least privilege role assignment. Exam tip. Use managed identities to retrieve secrets and grant only the minimum Key Vault data plane permissions required by the workload. Question number 426. Scenario. A team packages an ASP.NET Core 8 application as a Linux container. The Docker image must contain only the published application and the ASP.NET Core runtime. Compilation tools and the .NET SDK must not remain in the final image. Match the Docker file values to the appropriate locations. One value will not be used. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1. mcr.microsoft.com/.net/aspnet:8.0. Source item 2. .NET Restore. Source item 3. .NET Publish, C Release, O/app/publish. Source item 4. mcr.microsoft.com/.net/SDK:8.0. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A, base image for the build stage. Destination B, command that produces the deployable application. Destination C, base image for the final runtime stage. The first correct mapping is mcr.microsoft.com/.net/SDK:8.0 map to base image for the build stage. The second correct mapping is .NET Publish, C release, o/app/publish, map to command that produces the deployable application. The third correct mapping is mcr.microsoft.com/.net/spnet:8.0 map to base image for the final runtime stage. Here's why. A multi-stage build performs compilation and publication in the larger SDK image. Only the published output is copied into the smaller runtime image, so SDK tools and intermediate build files are excluded from the final container. Exam tip: use an SDK image to build and a runtime-only image to execute the application when minimizing a container image. Question number 427. Scenario: a company stores source code in an on-premises Bitbucket server. The server cannot accept inbound internet connections and is inaccessible from Microsoft-hosted agents. Azure pipelines will run classic pipelines manually or on a schedule. A machine inside the corporate network can establish outbound HTTPS connections to Azure DevOps. Match each integration requirement to the component that satisfies it. 2 source items will not be used. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1, a Microsoft-hosted agent. Source item 2, an other Git service connection. Source item 3, Azure DevOps service hooks. Source item 4, a self-hosted agent inside the corporate network. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A, store the repository connection and authentication details. Destination B, retrieve and build the source code from the private network. The first correct mapping is an other Git service connection, mapped to store the repository connection and authentication details. The second correct mapping is a self-hosted agent inside the corporate network, mapped to retrieve and build the source code from the private network. Here's why. The other Git service connection stores the repository endpoint and authentication details. The self-hosted agent can reach the private Bitbucket server and needs only outbound connectivity to Azure DevOps. Exam tip: use a self-hosted agent when a repository or dependency is reachable only from a private network. Question number 428. Scenario: a pipeline maintenance script uses Azure PowerShell to inventory every log analytics workspace in a subscription. The script must return the workspace resource objects and expand their properties. Complete the PowerShell command design. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Use the blank to enumerate the workspace resources. The choices for Statement 1 are get as a resource provider, get as a resource, or get as a resource group. Statement 2. Specify Microsoft.operationalinsights/workspaces by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are resource ID, resource group name, or resource type. For Statement 1, the correct selection is get as a resource. This command returns Azure Resource Manager resource objects. For Statement 2, the correct selection is resource type. This parameter filters resources by their provider and resource type. Exam tip: use get as a resource with resource type when an automation script must inventory a particular Azure resource type. Question number 429. Scenario: a legacy deployment integration cannot use workload identity federation and requires a Microsoft intra-application registration with a client secret. The application must authenticate by using its client ID and secret. Select and arrange the 3 actions required to configure the authentication flow. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Configure the integration with the application client ID and secret. Item 2. Enable a system-assigned managed identity for an unrelated Azure resource. Item 3. Register an application in Microsoft Intra ID. Item 4. Create a client secret credential for the registered application. Item 5. Add an unrelated secret variable to a pipeline. The correct sequence is as follows. First, register an application in Microsoft Entra ID. Second, create a client secret credential for the registered application. Third, configure the integration with the application client ID and secret. Here's why. The application object must exist before a credential can be created for it. After the application ID and secret are available, the dependent integration can be configured to use them. Exam tip. Create the identity first, provision its credential second, and configure the consuming workload last. Question number 430. Scenario. An Azure pipeline's build consumes dozens of third-party libraries. The compliance team must automatically identify each dependency and detect packages whose licenses violate organizational policy. Which capability should be integrated into the build? The available options are as follows. Option A, Helm. Option B, Ansible. Option C, Min Software Composition Analysis. Option D, Maven. The correct answer is option C, Min Software Composition Analysis. Here's why. Min Software Composition Analysis inventories open-source dependencies and evaluates their vulnerabilities and licenses against organizational policies. Why are the other options not correct? A. Helm manages Kubernetes application packages. B. Ansible automates configuration and deployment tasks. D. Maven builds Java projects and resolves dependencies, but is not a comprehensive license compliance scanning service. Exam tip. Use software composition analysis for third-party dependency inventory, vulnerability detection, and license policy enforcement. Question number 431. Scenario. A credential file was committed to a GitHub repository and appears in multiple historical commits. After revoking the exposed credentials, the repository administrators must rewrite the Git history to remove the file. Which two tools can perform the required history rewrite? Select two. The available options are as follows. Option A, GitHub Desktop. Option B, BFG Repository Cleaner. Option C, Git Rebase. Option D, Git Filter Repository. The correct answers are Option B, BFG Repository Cleaner, and Option D, Git Filter Repository. Here's why. Both tools can rewrite repository history and remove a file from all affected commits. The rewritten history must then be force-pushed and coordinated with repository collaborators. Why are the other options not correct? A. GitHub Desktop does not provide a complete repository history filtering capability. C. Interactive Rebase is unsuitable for reliably removing a file from every occurrence throughout a large repository history. Exam tip. After a secret is committed, revoke it first, and then use a history filtering tool to remove the exposed content from Git history. Question number 432. Scenario. A repository contains a client-side commit message hook that rejects commits whose messages do not include an issue identifier. For an authorized emergency operation, a developer must create one commit without running the commit message hook. Which Git commit option should the developer use? The available options are as follows. Option A, Squash. Option B, No Post Rewrite. Option C, No Verify. Option D, Message. The correct answer is Option C, No Verify. Here's why. The No Verify option bypasses the pre-commit and commit message hooks for that commit. Why are the other options not correct? A. Squash is not the option for bypassing commit hooks. B. No Post Rewrite relates to post rewrite hook behavior rather than commit message validation. D. Message supplies commit message text, but does not skip validation hooks. Exam tip. Client-side hooks can be bypassed with No Verify, so mandatory governance should also be enforced through server-side policies or pipeline checks. Question number 433. Scenario. You need to configure Azure pipelines to control app2 builds securely while ensuring integration with protected enterprise repositories. Which authentication method should you use? The available options are as follows. Option A, Windows and TLM. Option B, Certificate. Option C, SAML. Option D, Personal Access Token, PAT. The correct answer is Option D, Personal Access Token, PAT. Here's why. Azure Pipelines frequently uses a personal access token, PAT, or service connections backed by OAuth/app tokens to authenticate repository access and trigger builds securely, especially when integrating across services or managing legacy environments. Why are the other options not correct? A. Windows NTLM is an outdated authentication protocol intended for local Windows networks, not modern cloud pipeline automation. B. Certificates are used for code signing or secure TLS/SSL handshakes, not standard pipeline build triggers for repositories. C. SAML is an identity federation standard used for single sign-on, SSO, not pipeline execution authentication. Exam tip. When configuring pipelines or integrations requiring direct token-based authentication in Azure DevOps, PATs or service connections are standard solutions. Question number 434. Scenario. An organization is consolidating its work tracking, CI/CD, and source control platforms. It plans to replace Trello with Azure Boards, Bamboo with Azure Pipelines, and Bitbucket with GitHub. Match each existing platform to its replacement. The left side items are as follows. Left item 1. Bamboo, Bitbucket, Trello. The right side choices are as follows. Right option A. Azure Artifacts. Right option B. GitHub repositories. Right option C. Azure Boards. Right option D. Azure Test Plans. Right option E. Azure Pipelines. Right option F. GitHub Actions. The correct matches are as follows. Left item 1. Bamboo. The correct match is Azure Pipelines. Left item 2. Bitbucket. The correct match is GitHub repositories. Left item 3. Trello. The correct match is Azure Boards. Here's why. Azure Pipelines provide CI/CD automation, GitHub repositories provide Git source control, and Azure Boards provides backlog and work item management. Exam tip. Match tools by function. Boards for work tracking, repositories for source control, pipelines or actions for CI/CD, and artifacts for packages. Question number 435. Scenario. A publicly reachable Git repository is hosted by another provider. The development team must migrate the source code and commit history to a new github.com repository by using a browser-based tool and minimal manual effort. Issues and pull requests do not need to be migrated. Which tool should the team use? The available options are as follows. Option A. Import repository in Azure repos. Option B. GitTFS. Option C. GitHub importer. Option D. A normal Git clone without a subsequent push. The correct answer is option C, GitHub importer. Here's why. GitHub importer can create a github.com repository by importing source code and commit history from a publicly reachable Git repository hosted by another provider. Why are the other options not correct? A. Import repository in Azure repos moves code into Azure repos rather than GitHub. B. GitTFS is used for interoperability and migration involving Team Foundation version control. D. A normal clone creates only a local working copy and does not complete the migration to GitHub. Exam tip. GitHub importer is suitable for source code and history from an internet-accessible Git repository, but it does not migrate issues or pull requests. Question number 436. Scenario. A Java project is stored in Azure repos. Its builds must download dependencies from a server available only on the corporate network and publish the completed binaries as Azure DevOps pipeline artifacts. A proposed pipeline uses a Microsoft-hosted Linux agent and the Java tool installer task. It does not publish an artifact. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. The proposed pipeline satisfies all the stated requirements. Statement 1. The proposed pipeline satisfies all the stated requirements. The answer is no. Private dependency access requires suitable network connectivity, normally through a self-hosted agent, and artifact publication must be configured separately. Exam tip. Agent connectivity, tool installation, and artifact publication are separate pipeline design requirements. Question number 437. Scenario. A GitHub organization administrator is creating rule sets to enforce branch protections across all repositories without relying on legacy branch protection rules. Match each rule set configuration with its resulting enforcement behavior. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1. Require pull request reviews. Source item 2. Require status checks to pass. Source item 3. Require signed commits. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A. Prevents direct pushes to the branch and ensures all code undergoes human evaluation. Destination B. Prevents a pull request from being merged until the configured CI pipelines succeed. Destination C. Rejects commits that are not cryptographically verified using GPG, SSH, or S/MIME. The correct mapping is require pull request reviews leads to A. Require status checks to pass leads to B. Require signed commits leads to C. Here's why. Requiring PR reviews enforces peer validation and blocks direct pushes. Status checks ensure automated pipelines, like CI or security scans, succeed before merging. Signed commits require cryptographical validation, for example, GPG, of the author's identity. Exam tip. GitHub rule sets offer superior scalability over classic branch protections because one rule set can target multiple branches or repositories dynamically by pattern or tag. Question number 438. Scenario. A repository contains a YAML pipeline template named securebuild.yml. The template defines the mandatory dependency installation and compilation steps and accepts a step list parameter named user steps. A consuming pipeline must run the mandatory template and pass 2 additional steps through user steps. Which YAML structure should the consuming pipeline use? The available options are as follows. Option A. Define securebuild.yml beneath the parameters key without using a template expression. Option B. Insert securebuild.yml as a value inside the user steps list. Option C. Use extends with securebuild.yml and pass the additional steps through parameters.usersteps. Option D. Place a template key at the pipeline root and define user steps as a sibling parameter. The correct answer is option C. Use extends with securebuild.yml and pass the additional steps through parameters.usersteps. Here's why. The extends keyword makes the template the controlling pipeline structure. The consuming pipeline can supply its permitted additional steps through the template's step list parameter. Why are the other options not correct? A. A template cannot be activated merely by placing its file name beneath parameters. B. Adding the template file name as an ordinary step list value does not extend the pipeline from that template. D. A root-level template key is not the correct Azure pipeline syntax for extending a pipeline template. Exam tip. Use extends when a template defines the pipeline structure and parameters when the consuming pipeline supplies controlled values or steps. Question number 439. Scenario. A platform team will register a self-hosted Azure Pipelines agent by using an unattended script. The agent can use the default agent pool and its machine name as the agent name. Which 2 values must the script provide to complete the registration? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A. The Azure DevOps project name. Option B. Authentication credentials for agent registration. Option C. A deployment group name. Option D. The Azure DevOps organization URL. Option E. A non-default agent pool name. The correct answers are Option B. Authentication credentials for agent registration and Option D. The Azure DevOps organization URL. Here's why. The agent configuration process must know which Azure DevOps organization to contact and must authenticate an identity that is permitted to register the agent. The default pool and machine-derived agent name can be used when no alternatives are supplied. Why are the other options not correct? A. A standard organization-level agent does not require a project name during registration. C. A deployment group name is relevant only when configuring a deployment group agent. E. The agent pool name can be omitted when the default pool is acceptable. Exam tip. Unattended agent registration requires the server or organization endpoint and a supported registration credential. Question number 440. Scenario. A DevOps team is automating the migration from the legacy Log Analytics (OMS) agent to the new Azure Monitor agent (AMA) on Azure Linux virtual machines. The automated deployment must securely authenticate the agent to Azure Monitor without using Log Analytics workspace keys or local credentials. Additionally, the team must centrally define the specific syslog facilities to collect and route them to the appropriate workspace. Complete the configuration for the new monitoring architecture. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. To authenticate the Azure Monitor agent without workspace keys, the automation must configure the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are System-Assigned Managed Identity, Shared Access Signature, or Personal Access Token. Statement 2. To define the syslog collection and routing configuration, the automation must provision the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Data Collection Rule, Azure Automation State Configuration, or Log Analytics Workspace Query. For Statement 1, the correct selection is System-Assigned Managed Identity. Managed identities provide Microsoft intra-authentication for the agent, replacing the legacy workspace key method. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Data Collection Rule. A Data Collection Rule, DCR, centrally defines the data sources, such as syslog facilities and destinations for the Azure Monitor agent. Exam tip. The modern Azure Monitor agent, AMA, replaces legacy monitoring agents and relies on data collection rules, DCRs, and managed identities for scalable configuration and secure authentication. Question number 441. Scenario. An Azure Pipelines YAML job builds a Windows container image for an application that uses the full Microsoft.NET framework. The team must use generally available Microsoft-hosted images that provide a Windows Docker environment. Which two VM image values can satisfy the requirement? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A, Ubuntu 24.04. Option B, Windows 2022. Option C, macOS 15. Option D, Windows 2025. Option E, Ubuntu latest. The correct answers are Option B, Windows 2022, and Option D, Windows 2025. Here's why. Both values select generally available Microsoft-hosted Windows images with Windows build tooling and a Windows container environment suitable for full .NET Framework workloads. Why are the other options not correct? A. Ubuntu 24.04 provides a Linux host and cannot build Windows container images in Windows container mode. C. macOS 15 is not a Windows Docker host. E. Ubuntu latest resolves to a Linux image and does not support the required Windows container build. Exam tip. Full .NET Framework container workloads require a compatible Windows build host and Windows container base image. Question number 442. Scenario. A platform engineering team uses Terraform to deploy Azure infrastructure. The delivery workflow also requires centralized retrieval of protected credentials, automated infrastructure tests written in Go. Which two tools should the team integrate with the Terraform workflow? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A, Yeoman. Option B, Vault. Option C, Tiller. Option D, Teratest. Option E, Node.js. The correct answers are Option B, Vault, and Option D, Teratest. Here's why. Vault provides centralized secret management, while Teratest is a Go-based framework commonly used to automate tests for Terraform-managed infrastructure. Why are the other options not correct? A. Yeoman scaffolds application and project structures. C. Tiller was the server-side component of older Helm versions and is unrelated to Terraform testing or secret management. E. Node.js is a JavaScript runtime and does not directly provide either required Terraform capability. Exam tip. Terraform provisions infrastructure, Vault manages secrets, and Teratest validates infrastructure behavior through automated tests. Question number 443. Scenario. An Azure DevOps organization runs several Microsoft-hosted pipelines concurrently. Pipeline logs show that new runs remain queued while all purchased job slots are occupied. The organization must reduce the queue time without redesigning the pipelines. What should the organization do? The available options are as follows. Option A. Divide each pipeline into additional stages. Option B. Create another agent pool without adding capacity. Option C. Purchase an additional parallel job. Option D. Add branch filters to the pipelines. The correct answer is option C. Purchase an additional parallel job. Here's why. Parallel jobs determine how many pipeline jobs can execute concurrently. Adding another parallel job allows an additional queued run to begin while existing job slots remain occupied. Why are the other options not correct? A. Additional stages can increase execution complexity and do not add organization-level concurrency. B. Creating an empty agent pool does not increase purchased parallel job capacity. D. Branch filters change which commits trigger pipelines but do not increase concurrent execution capacity. Exam tip. Agents provide execution machines. Parallel job entitlements control how many jobs the organization can run simultaneously. Question number 444. Scenario. A company uses an external Agile work management platform with an Azure Pipelines release pipeline. The integration must associate issue identifiers with commits and show the deployment status of those issues when the commits reach production. The team wants to use an established Azure DevOps integration rather than build a custom connector. Which work management platform should the company use? The available options are as follows. Option A, Basecamp. Option B, Jira. Option C, Asana. Option D, Trello. The correct answer is option B, Jira. Here's why. Azure DevOps integrations can associate Jira issue keys with commits and report deployment information back to Jira when those commits progress through a release pipeline. Why are the other options not correct? A. Basecamp does not provide the described Azure Pipelines deployment traceability integration. C. Asana is not the established integration described for linking commit deployment status to issues. D. Trello does not provide the required commit to production deployment reporting integration. Exam tip. Select an integration that links issues, commits, builds, and deployments when end-to-end traceability is required. Question number 445. Scenario. You are configuring the Azure DevOps dashboard to display project metrics and team progress. The solution must meet the technical requirements for tracking team velocity, work items, and pipeline statuses. Which widget should you use for each metric? Drag the appropriate widgets to the correct metrics. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1, velocity. Source item 2, query tile. Source item 3, query results. Source item 4, sprint burndown. Source item 5, cumulative flow diagram. Source item 6, release pipeline overview. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A, metric 1, track team capacity and velocity across sprints. Destination B, metric 2, display remaining work in the current sprint. Destination C, metric 3, visualize work items in progress across states. The first correct mapping is velocity, mapped to metric 1, track team capacity and velocity across sprints. The second correct mapping is sprint burndown, mapped to metric 2, display remaining work in the current sprint. The third correct mapping is cumulative flow diagram, mapped to metric 3, visualize work items in progress across states. Here's why. The velocity widget tracks the amount of work a team completes across sprints. The sprint burndown widget shows the remaining work for the current sprint. The cumulative flow diagram, CFD, visualizes work items in progress across different workflow states over time. Exam tip. Match dashboard widgets directly to their primary Agile metric function. Velocity for historical speed, burndown for current sprint tracking, and CFD for state bottlenecks. Question number 446. Scenario. Test servers are registered with Azure Automation State Configuration. Whenever a server drifts from its assigned configuration, the configuration must be reapplied automatically. An administrator proposes setting configuration mode to apply only. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. The proposed configuration mode automatically remediates configuration drift. Statement 1. The proposed configuration mode automatically remediates configuration drift. The answer is no. Apply only does not reapply the desired state automatically after drift occurs. Exam tip. Use apply and autocorrect when configuration drift must be detected and remediated automatically. You have completed part 10 of the AZ-400 practice series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.